Alrighty, so uh, maybe we can start with a check-in. Like, how are you today? And the question I was thinking for to kind of, I don't know, like start some conversation is what do you understand by a right? Because the chapter is about rights. So maybe what do you think or what do you understand it's a right? What's your view of that? So maybe we can start like, how are you today? And then try to, I don't know, explain what do you think?
Yeah, I'm doing good. UCLA barely won last night for basketball, but more confident about tomorrow. And the dissertation work is starting to go really, really well. So I'm in a good place. But as far as the chapter, the first thing that really came to mind when I was thinking about rights had more to do with human subjects and thinking about the rights of people who are participating in studies, and conversely, that whenever you always have to promise that if something changes, that you'll let them know, keep your participants informed, let them know about the results of the studies and things. And rarely have I ever seen it talked about where it actually talks about test takers in the same way. Until really like reading this chapters more so.
That's very true. How are you, Merv?
Just a second, I was gonna sneeze. It just went back. I'm doing well, and my dissertation is coming along pretty good too. I'm excited about it, and I think when you first asked me what is a right, I think more from the fairness lens, to treat everybody fairly, that you have the same opportunities presented to everybody, irrespective of their background or or anything related to what they do in a test context. That was my perspective there.
I see. Yeah. I've been well on my side too. I came back to Chile and I am very happy because I've been able to meet with a lot of friends and having the food, and I don't know, like the weather also is very nice.
Is this also the first time right after COVID you get to go there?
Oh yeah,
right?
I haven't been here in 3 years almost. The last time I came to Chile was in 2019. And in Chile, before the pandemic, there was this social uprise that also was very important in the country. And I missed that as well. So the country changed in so many ways. And I came back when things were kind of like coming, coming back to normal, a new normal. Actually, this is like a joke now of in Chile that people are saying this is the new Chile. So everything that is kind of different from the tradition is like, this is the new Chile.
That's exciting.
Now, rights, for me, rights, I understand rights from this idea of justice, but more justice about what do you deserve. So there are many definitions of what is justice, but I like this idea of justice as receive what you deserve, and the idea of trying to change the question about what is that a person deserves in different contexts. And I think I understand rights more from that perspective, on like a more common agreement on what do we believe that everybody deserves in certain situations. So that's why you can have like human rights that are more universal, but also you can have like more specific rights that can be sometimes can be dependent on the country too. How do you understand, for example, right to access for education, or right to access for healthcare, or I don't know, the different rights that can differ the way a country understands the right. depending on their culture, their politics, whatever. So yeah, and in the case of testing, yeah, we have some ideas of what any XME would deserve, or some, I don't know, starting point at least. Alrighty, so maybe we can start by just sharing our thoughts about the chapter, opinions, or I don't know, whatever came to your mind after reading the chapter.
I think it was interesting that the focus was more on the test provider side, in terms of thinking like how they're going to inform the participants about their rights and all, instead of the test taker themselves. That was an interesting point. So there's more responsibility on the side of the test providers, developers, and publishers, more than the test takers themselves. So I think there has to be a lot of thinking. I like boards in the companies, testing companies, thinking in terms of in the shoes of the test takers, to see what should come to the picture as their rights, and they should clearly communicate it to the participants and test takers. That was interesting to me.
How about you, David? Do you have any other thoughts about the chapter?
I mean, it feels kind of ambitious to me. I don't think that a lot of test taking companies would do it, or at least, you know, I've done some work on the SATs, but I've mostly done work that involves, grade 3 through 10 testing. And, the types of things that you would be able to tell a young child versus an older child, that, I mean, it feels like some of these things about rights that the testing companies probably won't say it in a way that will be understandable. They won't share information in a way where I think that a young child would actually really understand what their rights are. I don't know. The only things I've ever read before seemed like they were always geared more toward an adult type reader. And so I like the ideas in here, but I'm wondering whether they go far enough.
Hello, Maggie, that you entered.
Hello.
We are just starting the discussion about the chapter, or thoughts, opinions, and whatever came to our mind after reading the chapter on the standards. At least on my side, maybe on my side, I've been having this, I don't know, this tension, if you want, because in the when we have had the session with about fairness, my own knowledge in validity, and this idea of the appropriateness that I've been kind of asking to the experts up to a certain point. So we have fairness, and we have all this idea of justice at the end, like what is fair to do in certain cases, and in my mind that works like some sort of moral or ethical question, but more on the community level, like what is correct to do as a society, as a group. And then you have the question more on the side of the test user, what is correct as a user, like using or not this test or not, which both are kind of ethical, but they're kind of different. And the tradition related with consequences, basically they take this thing that is called utilitarianism, meaning that I say that the use of the test is correct if there is a positive utility in the use. Meaning that if I kind of check the positive consequences, if I check the negative consequences, then if I add up, then I have like a positive value, if you want, or positive utility. But in that sum, eventually you can have unfairness. You can have like unfair situations that are kind of compensated by the good things that a test can have. And it's kind of contradictory, like this view from utilitarianism and a view from justice. And actually, I've been reading more about that. And it can happen, for example, that from a utilitarian point of view, you can do something that is unfair, but can be correct because it has some positive utility. And utilitarianism, even if can be like a reasonable way of approaching to the morality question, maybe it's not that good. So at the very end, all comes to what's the minimum that you cannot trespass in any case. So what are the things that you cannot do to a person taking a test? And that for me is kind of super related with the idea of rights, because when you are defining a right, you are kind of saying, okay, this is my limit. I mean, you cannot do this to any single person. That's not something that you can compensate, or that's not something that you can kind of, I don't know, accept in any scenario. So I think the chapter, I don't think the chapter is in that mindset for sure. But in general, the topic of rights is, I think, is super important because it makes the link between this idea of fairness and the idea of appropriateness, in the sense that when you have a right, you are marking a limit on saying when you cannot do this or when you should not use a test when you cross a limit regarding some right. And yeah, I mean, we have some consensus maybe in certain rights that are kind of minimum. For example, sharing information with the examinees, or I don't know, like the specifics, for example, when you have cheating and the procedure when you have something like that. But definitely, I think there's much more to say about that. So, for example, I am missing a right related with, I don't know, like proper interpretation in context. Like, have the right to have a version of the test that is adapted to your context. It's kind of indirectly said when they speak about like language or things like that, but you can go more on that, maybe word it in a different way. Yeah, so yeah, I kind of like the idea that the standards speak about rights, but still I think that we haven't thought enough about it. And the other thing that is kind of interesting for me is the, sorry, I'm speaking so much. It's the, like with what authority we can define rights. Because yeah, I mean, sure, we have like a professional community and we can define whatever we want, but still when you are entering about rights, you are entering some sort of legal thing. So I find kind of contradictory that the standards are said that are not a legal thing, but also are refining a right, which seems very legal to me. So that's kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of weird for me. Like, I mean, yeah, we can say there is a right, but with what authority we can define a right? I mean, where's the input of anybody else? I mean, even the communities of society, of law. Yeah, that's kind of something weird.
I agree in this regard. It feels awkward that this chapter is talking more to the developers too, because like, who are they that they can define the rights for the others? And that's very controversial in that regard. And what you were talking about was more philosophical, but yeah, it's interesting that, and I like the fact that Debbie highlighted, you cannot talk the rights to everybody in the same way, and there's not a universal way to talk about them for different groups of people, for different tests with different purposes even. So I think maybe it needs more detail, like more tailored details about the rights for different groups.
Maggie, do you have any thoughts?
I put a note on the board, but I think one of the standards, I think it's like 5.8 or whatever, 8.8 or 8.7, was about making sure that people actually have like truly informed consent, or their guardians or the representatives. And I think a lot of the parents that I worked with, if they really understood how the test was being used, I think a lot of them would opt out. And I think the way it is right now, especially at the school I was at, it's like we really try to tip parents' parent and guardian hands to like take the test, because like in New York City you can choose to opt out, but the more and more students that opt out, then we don't have a less rigorous measurement of like how the school progress is going overall, and then that affects funding and so on. So, but a lot of parents would, I think if they really understood their rights, like what they're really choosing to give away for their student, they probably would, I think a lot more parents would opt out and a lot more guardians would opt out, just because I think they think the test is saying one thing or determining one thing. And actually, I think a lot of what we use the tests for really has no bearing on their student. And, I think they're giving them more than they think they are in some cases.
I'm a bit ignorant on K-12, but do parents have to sign a consent form when you do a test to a kid in K-12?
So, yeah, I'm sorry. The default is you're taking the test. You have to like really do the process of opting out, at least in New York City. You have to like really very thoughtfully choose to opt out. It's like it's harder to opt out or they make it very difficult to opt out.
Yeah, I believe in California, they have to opt out as well, although they're trying to make that more difficult, I understand here, because sometimes parents are opting out for very random reasons. So they're trying to like have better rules about that, I believe.
But if you use this exact same test in a research project, and then you need to do an IRB, then the process, how will be very different, right?
Yeah, well, and I on a study actually confronted that issue, because we had parents who thought that all tests that were related to, that were aligned to any Common Core standard were bad. And so even though our test that we wanted to use was for an intervention purposes in a randomized controlled trial, I had some parents who just wouldn't consent for us to use their students' pre and post tests because they didn't understand, even though we gave them consent forms and documentation to indicate that it wasn't being used for that type of purpose, that it would be considered a class assignment just like any other class assignment, but we would also use it to study whether this intervention worked for the teachers. But those parents just didn't understand the difference between the two things, and I think it was probably more of an issue in that, like, they really didn't understand what were the purposes of the Smarter Balance tests for their kids and what were any benefits that came from that for their children.
And I have a follow-up question. How can they make it harder for the families to not opt out? Like, what are they doing to kind of force them implicitly to give the consent?
I think that's more case by case, but when at the school I was teaching at, the assistant principal would actually call up those parents individually who had started the opt-out process. They either have a long phone conversation or several phone conversations, or even invite the parent in and have like a long meeting with them to try to convince them to like tear up the opt-out paperwork and let their child take the test. Which, especially like ours was a very blue collar community. And so it's like, those parents don't have time to come up to the school and like do an hour-long meeting. Like, that's really inconveniencing them. So yeah, I think they just try to make it as like difficult as possible and as time consuming as possible. So the parents were like, you know what, whatever, just take the test.
Wow, thank you. I didn't know that was possible.
But yeah, in general, like the idea that maybe we should kind of have the same standard for research in general and test or the testing over the counter, if you want, because at the end it's kind of a research project. I mean, it's not that different. It's like a massive research project, so actually usually you have even more controls and things, but yeah.
Part of me wonders whether if the, well, cluster 3 has to do with accurate score reports, whether if the score reports actually gave more diagnostic information like they're really supposed to give, that would be understandable to a child and a parent to judge, maybe they need to get tutoring or something in a certain area, or like some more information that they can actually understand and then take action on. Then maybe you wouldn't have as many parents who want to opt out, because right now they just don't see the purpose. And to be perfectly frank, I belong to the district specialist group here in LA County, and I've watched them get score reports for their districts and try and figure out how are they going to use this information. And it was very difficult for math specialists to figure out how to use that information. So how is a parent supposed to understand the value?
Definitely. I think if it said more explicitly, like, hey, like your child so-and-so is awesome at like algebra, and like those are like strong suits, and like their weak areas were like questions 6 and 7, which were like geometry. So like going forward for the next school year, like so-and-so needs help with like triangles and like area of a triangle, or like if it gave like more of a breakdown like that, I think at least people would see a little bit more of like the value of like what they're doing. Otherwise it just sort of feels like a black box, and they get a paper in the mail and it doesn't feel very helpful.
And it sounds like there's this formality of the rights and how it's going to be communicated, but there's also informal on the background actions going on, mostly for K through 12 decisions and like rights. It's awkward that this is happening, and I think they should consider that into the next chapter, that there are different groups, and for these different groups, we might really be concerned about like what's informally also going on there too, because it's not just this is your right, but they should also know what shouldn't be done to them.
There was one in standard 8.1, information about test content and purposes that is available to any test taker prior to testing should be available to all test takers. Information that should be available. That makes a lot of sense to me. And actually in Chile, we have had some situations in the test used for college admission that sometimes when you have a change in the test or in the logic in general of the admission process, how long or how much time you should give in advance to communicate that change. And yeah, I also felt that standard, it's not just providing information. You should give that in a reasonable time, because what's the point of giving like information about the test 2 months after doing the test when you have been preparing a whole year, and maybe that changes a lot the plans. And that for me is kind of breaking that right, if you want, or kind of not being fair with the students. So yeah, and that have happened in Chile. I mean, there have been some changes that have been too sudden, and people that haven't had enough time to adapt. And
yeah,
and
I agree.
That can be.
And it's not just in Chile. That happened in Turkey back in time too. Well, in 2006 or 7, they changed the specifications and like the sub-score structure in a year. And this was a national university entrance exam that was just administered once a year. So students are preparing for that test, which is like highly competitive, and it decides where you're gonna study your college basically. And they had only 9 months of time to prepare for that. And they didn't even understand what kind of changes were there and why that was meaningful to have more sub-scores reported rather than a couple.
Yeah.
I really like that you said like timely changes, and maybe include the stakeholder even in those change decisions, so you can like hear from them what they expect, what they wanna like what they can understand or not. and communicate their rights accordingly to them.
Yeah, because even if you say timely, then who defines what's the right time? And that's the next question, if you want, on that right, because yeah, you can have the right for receiving timely information like at the right time, but when that's the exact time. And yeah, and actually in Chile, we are in the situation that, right, if you do a change now, that can be too sudden and can be a problem. But also there are so many things that you need to be changed that there is a pressure to do the changes quickly. So there's like two competing values, basically, that you want to do the change because you are kind of excited, but also you need to be careful with examinees that you are not giving a sudden change at the very end of their process and maybe like creating new problems with it. So, and it's tricky. At least for college admission, I think 2 years should be, because in 2 years maybe you can adapt. But 2 years is, I don't know, the first number that comes to my mind, but it's tricky, like to say when exactly is like the right time to, when exactly you need to kind of freeze the rules, if you want.
I think sometimes too, though, with how much information there is, like, for example, in California, like with the teacher credentialing or, K through 12. So it's public, it's controlled at the state level by the CDE or the California Teaching Commission. And then they will post things for comment on their websites. But the kids who I taught, most of my, like when I was first teaching, their parents never would have known that there was a CDE website or a CTC website to go and look at it and to see what was being proposed and to like provide feedback, even if they cared to provide feedback. I think that some of these things are going to more likely get comments by overly involved upper middle class parents who happen to still have their children in public schools, or people who have somebody who refers them to that information if they're studying to be a teacher.
That's very, very true. Okay. Any other thought, comment?
I think alongside standard 8.1, I think having the test preparation materials are also very variable. Like New York State posts some release date test questions every year, which is not consistent across states, because that's my dissertation like data is the state released state tests. But it's also like, again, there's a technology blocker. They're not just like a printed out booklet that's like sitting in an office somewhere that the parents can go pick up and like have that as like a practice test for their child. It's like you need to have internet access and a device that can actually read these PDF formats to be able to access the practice test questions for your student, help them practice. If the parent even knows, again, like what Debbie was saying, if the parent even knows that website even exists. And so that's part of the problem too. It's like parents who are really like more involved and focused, like who are, have the time and like luxury of the time to like really know what's going on, are the only ones who are really going to know that exists. And everyone else is going to not have the extra like practice material.
There was one thing that also kind of called my attention, because when you start to speak about rights and all these topics, I start to think about what are how other rights like human rights or I don't know, child rights interact with testing. In Chile, actually, I think I told you this before, that there is like a case in the Inter-American Court of Human Rights with some situation that happened with a test, and that court, they accepted the case. Actually, they are analyzing the test, and yeah, I mean the standard can refer to certain rights, but also we are embedded in other systems of rights that may have implications in testing. So I am kind of wanting to do that review. When I read that, it was like, maybe that's an interesting paper to see like I don't know, like review, well, particularly in K-12, actually, it could be interesting to see, like, I'm not sure how do you say that in English, like child rights, maybe? The UNICEF, or, well, in Spanish it's UNICEF. I'm sorry, how do you say that? But yeah, the rights that that any kid should have. How those interact with testing, for example. I don't know. Weird, huh?
Yeah, even the modality of a test could introduce some rights issues. That's very true.
Yeah, that was actually part of one of the arguments in the lawsuit against the University of California, because the lawsuit wasn't just representing Hispanic students. The lawsuit was representing students with disabilities. And part of their argument was when the UC at first was making the SATs test optional, that with online testing, that it was putting those students with disabilities at a testing disadvantage. And even though it was optional, those test optionals were still going to be used in making decisions concerning the fellowships and different access to funding that students might need to actually be able to attend the UC if they were to get accepted. And on the other end of that, I was part of the 8-9 person team that did the validity meta-analysis for the lawsuit.
Oh, nice. All righty. Any last comment? No, we're good. Let me see the board. Okay. So, well, maybe we can take time now to write questions to Akil Bello. Akil Bello is a person that has been working a lot in test prep for the college admission. So, I mean, I think he's appropriate for some of the topics here, but definitely I don't think he's specific or too too specific about the legal part, maybe, or I don't know, like the complete legal implications of rights, etc. So yeah, I mean, we can do the questions, but maybe we can target those questions to his skills. But yeah, I mean, we can see. Alrighty, so let's write questions. Okay. Also, you may take advantage and put likes if you don't have a question, but also if you like a question, you can do that too.
Thank you. It was nice meeting you.
Yes.
Have a nice weekend and enjoy Chile. I don't know when you're coming back.
If I'm going for NCME, so
Okay,
yes.
that's convenient.
Is anybody else going?
I'm sorry?
I'll be in San Diego.
Me too.
Yes.
Me too. Awesome.
And I booked some room on Sunday morning. Can't remember the exact time, but
Okay.
we'll have at least some space if you want to meet us, the study group.
Great.
I will send some more information by email.
Sounds good.
Yes.
Have a good weekend. Bye.
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 I'll stop the recording now then.